All right, well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here today. We're going to give a summary of where we are in regards to the recommendations that 21CP Solutions provided the city of South Bend just over 4 years ago, or the recommendations were just under 4 years ago, but they began their work in South Bend just over 4 years ago. And early on in the process, we were able to update the community on a lot of recommendations that we were able to get through. In particular, the progress on the discipline matrix and the use of force policy received a lot of attention. But there's been a whole number of other recommendations that the team has been working diligently to work through. And so we're here at a point where we have either completed them or have the answer on how we're going to get that done in the coming weeks and months. And so that's really where we are, and I'll just, for the presentation today, we'll give a brief background on what the report included, go through the implementation and what we've been able to accomplish through the work, and then, as I said, there are a few pieces that we can't say are completed. Check that off completely, but these are the remaining items that we will work on, and you'll see why some of them have, you can't just cleanly say they're finished. Some of them are ongoing work that will continue into the future. So as I mentioned, the city of South Bend 4 years ago engaged a group called 21st Century Policing Solutions, and this is a group, a consulting firm that advises police departments across the country, and they also served or came out of President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. Our beloved Chief Ruskowski served on President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force, so we had been bringing these ideas to South Bend for some time, and before even the city engaged this consulting firm. But nevertheless, this consulting firm came in and looked at, they came in October of 2019 and interviewed the department, assessed where we were as a city and as a department, and really focused in on 6 areas, which were use of force and de-escalation, body-worn cameras, bias-free policing, accountability in our department, community engagement and participation, and officer well-being, recruitment, retention, and developing the narrative. So how do we make sure we're sharing the information with the public in a way that reaches our residents? And so they made multiple site visits to South Bend, met with the department personnel, community representatives, and did a complete audit of the South Bend policy and data that we had with them. So in the course of that process, by early 2020, 21CP had, or by mid-2020 actually, they submitted a report with recommendations, and there were 54 recommendations contained in their report. And they also then, in July of 2020, provided an implementation guide to help the city figure out how, you throw 54 recommendations at the city and the department, you have to figure out how are you going to prioritize each of those recommendations and making progress. And so there was a whole process there, and we're pleased to say that we have gotten through almost all of the recommendations and successfully been able to implement them here in South Bend. And with those details, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Ruskowski.
Yeah, hopefully you won't need me to move the mics. If you can pick up or check. Are you okay? I think he's going to. I could have scooted closer here if he needed me to.
That's all right.
So the implementation itself was, as the mayor said, broken down into 6 categories: policy, training, accountability, data and reporting, community, and officers. Within each of those groups, we had people assigned to them, and I will tell you that the mayor's chief of staff, Casey Gurley, and I were called in outside of the regular progress reports that we got from each one of these. We call them like subcommittees, but the policy component was one-time fire chief Luther Taylor, Chief Eric Crittenden at the time, a representative from the legal department, and Caleb Bauer, who is in DCI now. but he used to work in the mayor's office. Training was Fire Chief Carl Buchanan and Chief Tim Lancaster. Accountability was Jordan Gathers, who's now at the VPA, and Captain Dave Herron from our Internal Affairs Division. Community was Mo Scott and Chief Crittenden. Data and reporting was Denise Riedel, head of our INT department, and Lieutenant Chris Hinton, who was an investigator in our Internal Affairs Division, who has since retired and went over to Notre Dame. And then we had, from the officers component, including the FOP, who had intimate dealings with the police officer, was Michael Patton, and then now Captain Kathy Fulnicki. And the progress report that they sent, so there was 54 recommendations, and 46 of them had been fulfilled, checked off, completed. Either we had been doing them, or we're in the process of finishing them. Based on further recommendations from 21CP, we honed down on those recommendations and incorporated them into our final product, where we could actually literally check that box. So Casey verified, I verified, then we ran everything to the mayor, and he triple or quadruple checked all the things that we had been working on, including our own internal staff. And Chief Skibbons had kind of somewhat inherited from Chief Reineris, and he stepped in as Jeff was stepping out, trying to be a part of this process, get up to speed, and then verify the things that were done and that were being done and proposed to be done. When you look at the 46 fulfilled and the 8 are still in progress, that's kind of deceiving, because many of those 8 that are still in progress will always be in progress. For example, use of force. We don't know what happens on each incident until after that incident occurs. So if force is used, we don't know the outcome, what precipitated, what was involved during it, and what happens afterwards. So every single use of force, we will revisit, we will check it with our policy, training, state law, federal law, etc., and see if we're still on the right track involving our use of force, as one example. So they'll always be dynamic, they'll always be evolving, and that's the way it should be as far as I'm concerned, not just with our police department, but with every police department, because that all falls into an accountability component. Community engagement, as you can see up on the slide here, that's been the biggest or the key part in our success. We received various recommendations through 14. I know it says 14 plus over there, and the reason it says 14 plus is because some of the CAG meetings were impromptu. Some of them were from neighborhood meetings, where we kind of had like a neighborhood meeting, but then a CAG resulted during that neighborhood meeting. And then we had FOP meetings, to where FOP officer members maybe didn't want to say something to 21CP, say anything to command staff, but felt more comfortable saying something at FOP meetings, so that it was like a hybrid version of one of those CAG meetings inside of an FOP meeting itself. So we did receive the invite, and we did obviously respond and show up to those invites with them. All of that was input, but as, if not more important, the community input as well. Our community has the stake in all of this, because that's what we are contending with, people in our community. And they needed to have a say in how we operate our emergency vehicles, in how we use force, in how we deploy the body cameras, and all the categories that you see here. Those were the main ones, but they also had input on many other things that 21CP didn't even dive into. I will tell you that, so the body camera policy, the use of force policy, the vehicle pursuit policy, training and recruiting, yes, we had the CAG meetings, yes, we had community and officer input, etc. But I will tell you that statewide, the majority of police departments are either emulating, have emulated, or have structured their use of all the categories I just mentioned from us. We were the first ones in the state to fully implement the body camera policy. I think we were tied, or maybe just a smidgen behind Lawrence. I think they were the first one when it came to the body cameras themselves. But still, nobody had any really good idea of how, like, to implement anything. It was very new at the time. We were the first in the state to get in-car cameras, and that was way back in the late 90s. that we had them. But again, so, we were leading the way and continue to do so when it comes to many of these things, especially adopted statewide use of force and our vehicle pursuit. We have been the go-to people for others to emulate. Next, there's actually a companion document. I don't know if you all received them. There is a link, or there will be a link probably right when this ends, if we don't have it already, on the city website, the southbendin.gov 21 CPC companion or CP companion document. You'd be able to view it there. It is rather lengthy. I don't remember the amount of pages itself, but I think it was like 40 or 50 pages. So it really spells out to the detail of what the recommendations were, what the progress was. And we did have, again, progress. We had short, mid, and long-term things that I know that Casey and I were reviewing every time one of those categories was reviewed, completed, or about to be completed. I think that's you, Chief Dan. Oh, sorry.
All right, the next section is an overview of the actions that have been taken and actions that are currently still in progress, a few of the areas that we're still working on. It is not a comprehensive overview of the entirety of what we're working on. It's just highlights here. So the first highlight that we have is a very important section. It's use of force. And this was truly a collaborative effort that we worked on with the community, the Board of Public Safety, special interest groups, hearing from the community first. We actually started this process prior to the 21 CP report being finalized. So we are already well on our way working on this one. You can see in the bullet points here some of the key updates that we had. These were suggestions from the Board of Public Safety as well as the community and special interest groups. Having clear definition for objective reasonableness, necessity, and proportionality. Those definitions were added so that officers had better guidance within the policy. These were pointed out to us by the community and also by the Board of Public Safety, and we immediately added those. And then we had clear prohibition on chokeholds and strangleholds, also important to the community. We were not teaching those in the police department as part of defensive tactics as it was. Those were not part of our use of force continuum, if you will. And then clarified the deadly force is only used as a last resort. We did have this wording in our policy previously. We strengthened that wording as a recommendation from the Board of Public Safety. And then emphasis on an officer's duty to intervene. So this also was in the policy, but we had to clarify. So adding wording to that clarified an officer who is on scene and maybe witnesses another officer using force that is maybe excessive, that they have a duty to intervene. So we strengthened the wording there in the policy as well. And then an emphasis on de-escalation. We had de-escalation in our duty manual prior to, but it was not incorporated into the use of force policy. So that was also one of the highlighted updates for the use of force policy. And then this was finalized in June 2021 when it was approved by the Board of Public Safety. And the next slide is an overview of the review process internally here at the police department. We had a process in place, however, we didn't have specifics lined up for each responsibility in these areas. So the officers who had a part in each of these areas, outlining that responsibility and letting them know what we need as management from the police department and what the city needed, what the community wanted, and what the Board of Public Safety wanted. We added a layer also to this, that second layer that you see here, supervisors reviewing video footage when a use of force report is filled out. Our use of force reports used to be separate from an incident report. And with the help of IT, that was added to the incident report, so they automatically had to fill that out if they checked the box that force was used. Then that report would not be approved by a supervisor. It couldn't be unless the supervisor opened that page, and once they did so and approved it, it automatically went to the Internal Affairs Division. So the process became more efficient for us. The several layers all received notice at once that force had been used. And then ultimately, the use of force review board, we added individuals to that as well. Management from the police department, as well as instructors in specific areas, from firearms to taser instructors and defensive tactics instructors. They're all a part of this use of force review board, and if they sign off that they believe the policy was violated, it ultimately goes to us as chiefs to review as well. So a several layered approach. That was one of the recommendations by 21CP that we add to those layers, and we did so. The vehicle pursuit report is also, it's not a use of force, it's a separate report as well, but that was also added to our incident report. So an officer had to check the box if they were in pursuit, and that form as well goes to a separate review board and internal affairs. So one more addition that we added to the incident reports, becoming more efficient in our process of reviewing those incidents. I think this
I'm just here for one, right? So I'll
Yes.
I'll just
Slide
speak
over.
over here so we don't move the microphones too much. But we know that the way in which we respond to folks experiencing a mental crisis was an important issue to the community, and we've worked with a number of partners to make sure our response is the best way possible. And so first at the SBPD, there are trained officers in crisis intervention. And so we have, as of September, I believe is the date on this number, 18 crisis intervention team officers within our department. And so that requires to get started 40 initial hours and then ongoing training to keep up with that certification. We've also, as many in this room know, we've worked with Oaklawn on their mobile crisis teams, and their goal is 24/7 coverage. That's something that the challenge to getting there actually in this case hasn't been funding. It's been getting the personnel to be able to cover the 24/7, but nevertheless they've been up and running since last year. And then, of course, we anticipate the opening of the crisis center itself over at the old Memorial Epworth, and that's on track to be opened early in 2024. So with that, back to Chief Skivens.
Strategic recruitment, hiring, and retention plan. 21CP recommended that we take actions to maintain our top talent and also to attract top talent. I've said this multiple times, but we call things priorities sometimes, but do we truly make them a priority? And with this specific area, we put together teams and truly made it a priority. We not only used officers within the department, but we used non-sworn individuals working for the department, such as our PIO, Ashley Chapp, as well as individuals throughout the city. Caleb Bauer was a big part of helping us with our recruitment plan and retention plan, and then marketing. Being the largest agency in the area, in our county and surrounding counties, we offer several things that other departments just can't offer. We're twice the size of most of those departments. We weren't taking advantage of that in our marketing approach, and so that was one of the ones that Ashley O'Chap made sure we were hitting. And it's a yearly approach as well. So we're not just doing this per quarter because we're going to go through a hiring process. We're doing it year-round now. So that made a huge difference for us as well. The city put together a team to work on wages. Through wage negotiation, the mayor, along with city council, very supportive in putting together a good package for the police department. And that has also led to our success in retirement, hiring, and retention. Those were two key elements of the plan, as well as our training and recruitment division, thinking outside the box, how can we become more efficient? Obviously, INT adding links to our pages that would send them straight to applications, easier for an individual to apply. Where can they find the application? Instead of having to come in here and fill out a hand-filled application, having that stuff electronic made a big difference for us as well. Appreciative of that. And then prospect days, putting together a one-day, 5 different areas that you can test through and only have 3 areas to test after that, made a huge improvement on getting people through the door to potentially become recruits for the South Bend Police Department. We're at 245 officers now. A year and 9 months ago, we were at 209, so I feel like the plan we put together is definitely working. Don't go off script.
All right, so the discipline matrix, you've heard it before. If you remember, During when Mayor was giving his COVID updates, we kind of expanded that. The last one we did was the final version at Howard Park when the Board of Safety accepted the discipline matrix. For those, as a refresher that don't remember, many people were involved in this first and foremost. So it was obviously our community members, some CAG meetings, Faith in Indiana, several other outside entities were involved. The South Bend Police Department, FOP, Board of Public Safety, City Legal, and quite frankly, the mayor himself. On almost every single instance, we had conversations about what this would look like, what it should look like, and what does our community think, what do our officers think. So that, in my experience, that hadn't happened before, along with every single one of these things that we're addressing with 21CP. But this one in particular, because we never had anything, it almost seemed to be arbitrary. Whoever was chief at the time would recommend those disciplines. Irrespective, the Board of Safety still had the final say when it came to any type of discipline, written or higher. But we never had anything internally where officers could look to, I don't want to say look forward to, but look to what could happen if they stepped out of line. So we have everything on here that could be possibly thought of as a guide, from a verbal reprimand all the way to termination. So level 1, the lowest level, and the lowest level of that level 1 is a verbal reprimand. And obviously in a level 6, that is up to and including termination, even for a first offense. So I know that's been made available before. I think that's on our website, but I'm not positive on that. If not, I'm sure when Denise is in here, she could probably get it on our website, and so are several others from INT can get that on our website. But with that, that was 10 or 11 months of back and forth, not just with the Board of Safety, but special groups. I know that the mayor's office had side groups that would look at different perspectives than we as police were looking at, and that was a lot of back and forth that we were able to reach what we have in this guide right now. And 21CP actually did have some pretty good input on that, making suggestions of places they've seen elsewhere that seem to work for them. So far, it has worked for and with us. And then back to Dan. Can you get a boom mic? Can we get a boom mic next time?
Strengthening our community police relations was another recommendation from 21CP. Engagement opportunities, having different ones. We all know that we have scripted ones throughout the year, such as Cops and Goblins. We have community cookouts. Those are engagement opportunities that we push out there. We want the community to come to us so that we can engage with them. But one of the things 21CP pointed out was having those opportunities for community members to see the officers working in their areas. So having more bike patrols and foot patrols became an important thing for us to get back to. But first we had to get our staffing levels up. And now that they are, that allowed us to create CROs, community resource officers. And their primary objective is to work on community police relations. So you'll be out there, if you live in the community, you'll see their faces. They'll be going to houses and knocking at the door when there's issues that arise. If there's neighborhood issues, quality of life issues, those are the individuals they'll likely see first and foremost. They also act as a liaison to the different shifts, the patrol shifts. So they can relay back to those shifts that officers need to spend more time in these areas on foot and on bike. Special requests that come from residents in the neighborhood wanting to see those officers who work in their area. That's another thing that we're currently working on, and we are hopefully in 2024 going to be able to put out e-bikes. So we'll have electric bikes that officers can utilize, and that's for the beat officers, not just for the CROs. And we hope that that allows us to have those engagement opportunities with residents in the area, those officers out there that are working in the specific area. But back to the CROs, that is their primary objective, is community engagement, going to community meetings with neighborhood associations, and then relaying that information back to the police department. And the next slide is, the next couple slides are training. So the highlights that we have for training is 21CP talked about de-escalation training and bringing in a consultant to discuss with us and provide us instructors in-house that could give de-escalation training throughout the entire department. So we put 16 of our officers through Polis Solutions training. That was a 2-day training course. From that, components of de-escalation are now used in all of our use of force trainings. From firearms training to taser training to defensive tactics training, the components of de-escalation are talked about in a classroom setting first in most of those scenarios, and then hands-on training takes place. We all know that de-escalation starts with communication, so that is the primary topic before we get started with use of force such as defensive tactics. So before we have to put hands on someone that maybe we have to arrest, using our words first and communicating with them. That is the primary objective in de-escalation, is using our words first. So that was what came out of Polis Solutions, is having those components that we talk about, we utilize in the training from firearms all the way to defensive tactics. And then our use of force training, they advised that we should have an increase in that. So we address that with defensive tactics. We have 5 to 6 firearms trainings per year, but we are only having 2 a year 2.5 years ago. 2 years ago, we started having mandatory 6 trainings a year in use of force. So we went from 8 to 12 use of force trainings per year, about a 25% increase. And moving forward, we look to push that also into our taser training, our pepper ball training, and our OC spray training that will have de-escalation and use of force is all combined in one. And we'll talk about some of the Polis solution components before we start each of those. Next, we have classroom training that we had August of 2021. Officers from the department as well as non-sworn employees here at the police department went through a 4-hour course on implicit bias. This was put on by Bob Ross, Professional Consulting Associates out of Ohio. We also combined this with elements of the city that we work closely with, from city legal to human resources, individuals in the mayor's office, and Board of Public Safety. All of the Board of Public Safety members and some city council members attended the 4-hour training along with us, and we received good reviews about that. It is now mandatory for all new officers on the Police Stop and Police Department to go through this same implicit bias training. Not to mention at the academy, they have also included that into their curriculum. And then customer service training, the command staff, captains, and chiefs all went through an 8-hour course that was provided to us by J. Evelyn Consulting. An abbreviated version also took place for our mid-level managers, our lieutenants, and then our frontline supervisors, our sergeants, also went through this same 4-hour course.
So now we're looking at some of the things that are ongoing, are how we continue to improve our community policing model is something that is not going to be something we check off ever, because that's an ongoing dialogue. But we have been working with the community to assess how we've been approaching it and what are areas for improvement. And we've done some surveys and other outreach with the community, and we do expect a report on those activities here in the near future. But like I said, this is not a recommendation that really ever ends, because things evolve over time, and community has different priorities over time. And so we'll want to continue to make sure that we're working with the community in partnership to make sure that our neighborhoods are safe and that we're doing the job that they expect us to do in the best way possible. The Community Review Board, I will note on the implementation guide that's 21CP gave us in the summer of 2020. This was a long-term, when you look at all the recommendations, this was one of the few that was placed in the long-term category, because they are aware of the complexity of forming these boards, and they've had experience across the country and how these boards are formed. And so we are moving in that process as quickly as possible. We know that we did hit a couple little barriers that we've since crossed along the way, and we have a review director who is able to talk to the community, is able to work with our department and act as that liaison. And at this point, we are waiting for the Common Council to seat the 9 community members onto the board itself. But when the board does get seated, the work to establish the processes will be in good shape, as opposed to if we seated the board at the same time the director was hired, we wouldn't necessarily have all of the board procedures and all of the things up and running all at once. So still on track to be seated in the coming weeks, and look forward to in 2024 to be able to check off fully. So with that, open it up to any questions that you may have.
Starting with just a technical question, what is the difference in function between the use of force review board and internal affairs?
Internal affairs is a layer of that process. So internal affairs would investigate should the sergeant on the shift review that body-worn camera footage and feel that the force was possibly excessive. They would turn that over to internal affairs and give them that notice that we don't believe force should have been used in this incident. And internal affairs, because they're outside of that shift work, they're not directly supervising, they're their own separate entity within the police department, they would handle the investigation. Their findings would then go to the chief of police.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the partnership, the newer partnership between the department and Oak Lawn on the mental health crisis teams, there was a lot of reporting on that last year as that was coming together. We're now kind of nearing, it's a little shocking as I say it, but we're nearing the end of 2023. How has the department found that partnership is working out now that it's had a little bit of time to kind of get its feet wet?
I will tell you, well, so I have bi-weekly meetings, so we have the Behavioral Health Crisis Center is one meeting. There's actually 3, and I can't remember the third off the top of my head for whatever reason, but they're all synonymous, essentially. And then you have the Mobile Crisis Response Team. With that, they've expanded their hours, so that has been helpful. It's still not moving at the pace that I or the officers would like to see, but we have made progress. It hasn't stalled like it has in the past, and I will tell you that the Mobile Crisis Response Team and even the BHCC have been very receptive to our input. I think a lot of good things can expand from this. Maybe a high incident review team could come of this eventually when everything is up and running to everyone's expectations. So I guess the short answer is it's still not as fast as I'd like to see, but it's not stalled anymore either.
And when you say it's not moving as fast as you like to see, is that mostly in reference to they just don't have the staffing to go to as many calls as?
They are making, as a matter of fact, I had a meeting yesterday and they are making progress in the staffing. I know there was some work done there on their end when it came to their HR department, trying to facilitate things. So I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I just do know from the meetings they have been really trying to expedite the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a staffing issue primarily because when you think of when you call 911, the resident doesn't say which team, 911 figures out which team to dispatch, and that's a 24/7 operation. So these first responders, if there's a fire, our fire's got to be ready to respond 24/7. If it's an issue with that the police have to respond, they have to respond, 24/7. No question, there's no ability to have a lapse in time of coverage or any of that. That's why we have the staffing of police we do. That's why we have the staffing of fire and EMS that we do, so that we can cover the calls that come in. And so, that's the goal. But we have to have the people to be able to cover with that kind of reliability, and that's what we're working toward. And I think everyone, Oak Lawn included, would say there's been some frustration that we haven't been able to achieve that level yet.
This is a bigger picture question, but when you have laid out all the different policies and changes and updates that the department in the city, the Department of Health in the city have undergone, since 2019, since the fatal shooting of Eric Logan, which kind of sparked this review. Again, thinking a little bit beyond just the policies themselves, do you think that the nature of the department has changed at all in those years? What is kind of the underlying glue that holds together all these different policies? Because, you know, you look at one situation, you don't necessarily say, oh, well, that means we should do prospect days and get more recruitment. But how does it kind of all tie together beyond just the policies and in a big picture manner?
Well, I mean, I'll go first, and Chief can follow. But I mean, there's been a shift in this department, you know, since Chief Ruskowski stepped into the role in toward the end of 2015. I mean, he brought change and you know, if you want to use the word reform, he brought that since he began in his role on day one. Obviously, over the past several years, you know, we've had a lot of retirements. So the makeup of our department is very different than it was just from a personnel standpoint. I think just under 100 new officers since the beginning of 2020. And you know, if you do the math there, you know, obviously when we're close to full staffing, let's just say 250 plus or minus, we weren't at 250. So it was almost, you know, getting close to 50% of our officers are new within the past few years. So, you know, that's why it was critical to make sure that we had the policies right and we had the trainings to get our new officers up to speed with how to lead in 21st century policing here in South Bend. So, Chief, I don't know if you have more to...
No, yeah, I mean, you know, the canned answer would be a paradigm shift, right? That's what most people would say, most chiefs would say. But we've literally experienced a DNA change at our department. Now, whether that's newer, younger officers coming in, having a different perspective, but I will tell you, this is my 36th year, and before, you would typically have, not all, but many administrations that would not listen. And I'm not talking just about the police administration. So do as I say, that has gone out the window. And I will tell you, and Dan and Tim that are in the room can attest to this, one of the things that I first noticed, because I experienced it, as did they, is the communication logjam. Nobody ever had a problem with the top down, right? Because that's just the way it's always been. But nobody ever bothered listening from, and not to be disrespectful, the bottom up. What are our patrol officers? What are our detectives experiencing, feeling, seeing, hearing? Why do we not know about that? So we made that. We have weekly command staff meetings with internal affairs, with training. You name an agency within the department, entity within the department, and we have meetings to talk about those issues. Everything from my car's not running right to I may be having problems at home. So, I mean, we don't discuss their business, but we're aware of it, and we move to seek. We have critical incident stress management, officer wellness, which was one of the points on here that we've incorporated. So there's a lot of great ideas out there. Typically before, people didn't listen. We've been listening, and that's been helpful. And more importantly, I think when you have other city entities, INT, mayor's office, legal department, that are offering input because they've never been asked before, that makes our jobs, putting it together is a lot harder, but overall it's a lot easier to do when you have everybody having input.
And I think the last one for me, one of the things mentioned was, you know, community feedback and getting community input. I believe earlier this year there was a community kind of outreach initiative, a meeting of kind of welcoming community input into how policies are formed and things of that nature. And you know, obviously that's more than just at one meeting. This is the one chance people can say that. Kind of from, I won't speak for the other members of the media in the room, but from my experience, it seems that the people who have the strongest opinions on community police interactions aren't always able to make it out to a meeting at this time or this one evening. And so from the city's point of view, how do you guys keep taking in community feedback when sometimes the most direct methods are like, we'll be here at this time, show up. It's not always possible, it's not always huge turnouts. How do you keep engaging the community beyond those more formal settings?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and that's a challenge not just on police matters, just any matter in the city when we're looking to engage community members and get their input. And as you noted, and you've been to these events, and oftentimes, you see some of the same people over and over again. And of course, their opinions are important, and we want to factor those into our policy making. But then there's a lot of people who aren't necessarily, they may be interested in seeing changes, or obviously they have a stake in how we're doing things, but they're not able to come. There is this notion that we have gotten away from is we are living in a populist age where the people are coming and there's more direct input on every policy, but there are a lot of folks, I think, still in our city and in our country that believe in the representational system that we have, in terms of they vote people into various roles, and they trust that they're going to do what needs to be done to balance different interests. And so I think you could make that argument that there are a lot of folks who know that we're working to get the feedback, we're working to balance differing opinions, and figure out how best to move forward. And so that's critical, obviously. And that's something that has eroded over time, which is where we find ourselves as a country, is that the trust in our institutions has eroded, and that's a problem. But there still is a significant segment of our population that does trust our institutions, that we're acting on their behalf, and we're going to do the best, we're going to do the job the best way we can.
Yeah, and I think there's honestly, Mark, there's other things that people don't even think about. Board of Public Safety, Common Council. When we have department head meetings, I've heard from the director of Board of Public Works that said, hey, we had this officer complaints on officers. Those actually result in conversations that we have of how can we do things better if that's the case. Even if the officer didn't do anything wrong, why are people confused about why she or he did what they did at that specific call? So all those are input, and then there's many, many more. I've heard from the fire department, whether it's medics on scene or later on from one of the fire chiefs or assistant chiefs, to hear those things. So there's Citizens Police Academy. When we do our monthly crime meetings, all those people that attend those have input. And again, we get them online, we get them on emails, we've done surveys. So the opportunities are there, and we're looking for more ways to present those opportunities.
And I would also add that we do structure a lot of these community meetings in the evenings, which are not the normal work days for many of the city folks who attend those and help staff those. And so we do that with the eye toward we're working with the residents' schedule, not our schedule. But if you have, we're open to any ideas of how to engage more residents and get more feedback. We have online forums. We send it out. We blast it out. We try to get feedback in every way possible. You saw during the budget process, the INT team was even at Fusion Fest. So, you're enjoying a festival at Howard Park and able to weigh in on the budget process. So any way we can get feedback, we're trying to, and we're always open for ways to improve.
Just briefly touched on the bias-free policing. Can you just give us some examples exactly of what went on in those meetings and how you guys are actively, trying to limit our, inherent biases?
I did not go through the implicit bias training. I have been through an implicit bias training, but not the one that the officers went through. But generally, these trainings, just go through that. There's often this. This is a conversation that we have oftentimes where there's confusion about where disparities or things can arise. It's not always a conscious. It's not always a conscious thing. We know, and there have been studies that have proven that there are outcomes that are unfortunate that because there is this implicit bias. And so the only way to combat that is to have some awareness of that and try to make that a conscious thing. Like, is this a case where there may be an implicit bias occurring? So it's an education. It's a kind of giving examples of where we've seen this arise, and so that equips our officers with the ability to think through making sure that we're fulfilling our duty to provide bias-free policing.
I'm wondering what's at these meetings of the group violence intervention strategy meetings, what's been learned about what the police department can do to intervene instead of being reactive to violence? What's the role?
Yeah, I think that staffing was a part of the problem with the sub-strategies of GVI. So at full staffing, we're now able to implement some of those sub-strategies, and that was brought up routinely. What is the police department doing that is proactive to keep these incidents from happening? Deterrence measures and things of that nature. And so now that we're at full staffing, we're able to fully utilize GVI, and we're listening to the core group members and what they want to see from law enforcement. So plugging those back into the strategy has been beneficial to us. I don't know if that answers your question completely, but.
Well, I mean, we need to take a step back what the group violence intervention strategy is. I mean, it's fundamentally, it's focusing, we live in a world of limited resources, so it's focusing our resources in on the folks who are driving most of the violence. So in any city, a small number of people are driving a very disproportionate amount of the violence. And so it's focusing the resources on them, not just law enforcement. Law enforcement is one part of the resources being focused on them. Another part is the social services. That's why we have the partner Goodwill and others. The other piece is the community members. Make sure that the community members are working with neighbors to get them back onto a better path. So it's not just a law enforcement strategy. The strategy is we're going to focus on, we have limited resources, we're going to focus them on where the violence is being driven, but it comes at it from multiple different angles. On the law enforcement side, of course, I mean, for a predictor of who's going to be a victim of gun violence is, are they involved, or do they know, are they close to someone who's involved in shootings? And so that's a predictor. And so that's something that we keep track of. We investigate shootings. We know who's involved, and we know who's at risk. And so that's something that then we bring the resources to bear. Now, obviously, our first approach is we want to get them off a path of violence. We want to offer the services that gets them onto a better path. But ultimately, we have to make good on our promise to deliver justice to victims and keep peace in our streets. And that's when there are things like the enforcement action. There's, okay, you guys, this is the group that's really causing havoc in our neighborhoods and our city, and now we're focusing in efforts to stop you.
Going back to the community review board real quick, I know, Mayor, you said this was always going to be like a long-term work in progress. All eyes were kind of on it back in April whenever the director was selected, and I remember correctly, I feel like even names of community members that might sit on the board were kind of being thrown out. Do you know why there still isn't like an official board formed yet? If there's any hurdles that the council has, gone through trying to get this board together, or is it just time?
I have not heard a specific hurdle other than, I mean, this is true generally, and this is by design. Legislative bodies are oftentimes slower. There's 9 members. They have 9 different ideas of how things should go, and they have to come up with a consensus among themselves. And so that's probably a big part of it. And you can look at even the hiring process of the director. When it switched over back into the mayor's office, I deferred that to the Common Council. And they promised a long process, which was good, but that long process ended up taking over a year to do. So there's a balance between efficiency and speed versus making sure they're getting it right and getting everyone on board. So that's the broad statement. I haven't heard a particular barrier to seating the board, and I know that President McBride is intent on getting that board seated here in the coming weeks.
I'm curious from the chief's point of view, now that Charles King has been in that position for some months, is there more clarity on what exactly his relationship with the police department is going to be as he's doing his independent job?
Well, I don't want to speak for Mr. King, but I will tell you that he's been very inquisitive. So asking a lot of questions, we do not mind them. We've been transparent in everything that we do anyway, so it's irrelevant. But he has attended like all of the neighborhood meetings, our Citizens Police Academy, He's come down on, they have a standing meeting with our internal affairs, don't discuss specific cases, but I will tell you that some have been resolved, like maybe from our perspective, and he may have questions about because he's been contacted by somebody else from the community, and explanations are given to him as to why. So from an inquisitive perspective, yeah, he has been, not just with me, but with our internal affairs, with our division chiefs. He came into one of our command staff meetings, introduced himself, asked questions, kind of saw how we run our command staff meetings, the use of force, pursuit review, things like that. So he's got a really good idea, at least from my perspective, of how we do things internally, but the rest is going to be thrown in his lap.
And there's been clarity from the beginning, and we want to make clear that the state law outlines authorities very clear. There's nothing that the city can do unless the state legislature makes changes, and so the Board of Public Safety is the only body that can fire or take disciplinary action beyond the couple days that the chief can do without the Board of Public Safety. So that's the Board of Public Safety, and then they make further that the chief of police has sole authority. I forget the exact language, but very strong is complete authority over the police department. So those are state laws. So there's we have to. That's been clear from the beginning. Is what kind of authorities does this board have? It's not it can't hire or fire officers, can't discipline officers, but it can look into complaints. And so what this office offers is another avenue or a primary avenue where residents can go if they have concerns about our police department or officers. They can file those complaints, and then they can follow up on them. Now, we've also been clear from the beginning that there wasn't a desire to duplicate investigations unless So we would think rare, if ever, there would be a need to have an independent investigation because they will get to see the outcomes of the investigation that's on the administrative side, and so that would be our goal. I mean, unless there's a strange case where this body feels like they need to open up an individual investigation. But again, we would think that would be very rare because there's going to be great communication between the administration and this body, and we feel good about our department and our officers. Obviously, the mayor, if we believe there were issues within our department, it's on us to figure out and hold them accountable. And so that's not the case. So that's why we feel very good that there won't be a number of independent investigations to follow.
So what do you think the ideal role of Mr. King is then as the mayor after he's been in city government for a few months?
The idea, like I said, he's not in the police department. He is a resource for our residents to be able to come and talk to and share concerns about what's happening in our police department. He also, as he sits under the mayor, he's able to go ask, as Chief alluded to, ask the hard questions and see and get answers, and then in my view, he's a great liaison because he has access on the inside, but he's an independent. He's outside police, but he has access on the inside, so he can get some answers and then share that with the public who may be concerned about any number of things. And it is an extra layer of accountability. I mean, like I said, we don't think there's going to be a need for it, but let's just say down the road there's a different chief, different mayor, and there's a different situation in the department. It does add an extra layer of accountability.
One more from me regarding staffing levels. One of the narratives over the past few years has been there's been a very high uptick in staffing, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Looking more broadly than just South Bend Police, but all over the state and all over the country, there's fewer and fewer people who want to go into policing, and so therefore, basically it's a bidding war now where agencies are upping salary offers kind of left and right. Is that something, and that's that's not the only way you can recruit and retain officers. That's a major way, as is in any walk of life. Is that something that the city is concerned about from a financial standpoint going forward? Because that doesn't look like it's getting any better in terms of salaries going down. And how does the city look? Because I think it seems that everyone is a fan of the levels where the police department is at right now, but it's not always going to be that way as other departments try to find money to raise and counter-raise and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, in the full context here, we're actually going to need to increase our officers over time if we continue growing as a city. So, I mean, if you think of a standard...
Increase the number of officers?
Right,
okay.
Right. Because, I mean, if you think of a standard of per capita, if your population's increasing, you're going to need additional officers to continue to meet that level of service. And so, you know, that's how we're looking at the future, that you know, this, just because we're getting back up to these levels, we're not going to, you know, take our foot off the brake, or put our foot on the brake, or off the gas, because we know, as you mentioned, how fragile this can be. Because you just have to look around, cities around us, cities across the country that are having real challenges staffing their departments. And so, you know, and I think it's good. I mean, I guess I would say anecdotally, I think the profession is getting back on track. You know, it took a hit. You know, some fair, some not. That you know, young folks didn't want to go into this profession, and I think that's getting better. Pay is obviously a piece of any. You know, you could get an economist up here and talk about supply and demand, and so that's part of it. So perhaps we had been underpaying or undervaluing our officers for a long time, but for a long time, fortunately, we you know, cities could get by without having to adjust. So it's not just in policing. There are other areas in city government, other areas in other sectors that are having to seriously adjust compensation because of the supply of people. So that's we hope that we're through the worst of that, at least from our perspective. But you know, there is a limit. This is a good career. I mean, you have retirement benefits. You have you have good compensation levels now across different agencies, and it is fundamentally, this is a job about helping people. This is public service. So for a generation that really is focused on impacts beyond or meaning beyond just the job itself or just earning a paycheck, our officers can go home at night to be proud of they're serving their community, they're making their community safer and a better place. Is that it? All right.